Welcome back to From Corporate to Cashflow. We are Andrea and Liz Schwab, two pharmacists navigating the process of building time and financial freedom through real estate investing and lending while working our day jobs. Navigating the journey is difficult, but our podcast guests are experts in showing us how it's done. And today we have none other than our favorite expert, Liz Schwab, on here to talk about her own personal journey getting started in real estate. So thanks, Liz, for joining me today, as always, but especially excited to be talking more about you today.
Why, thank you, Andrea.
Very excited. So, I really want to hear a little bit more about your journey. How did you get started and how did you transition to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think that as everyone should be aware by now, we're both pharmacists, right? And it took me a second to really think about what I really wanted, actually, because I feel as healthcare providers, we spend so much time being educated and spending time studying, and you're so heavily invested in that sometimes you don't take the time to step back and think, what is my long-term goal with this? And so at some point I started thinking, is my goal to have a W-2 forever? At what point am I going to be able to retire? What does that look like for me? When do I want to retire? How much money would I have to make each month to retire? And how do I go about doing that? So in my free time, I began reading more about real estate and where I would maybe fit in that puzzle. So I think I talked before about how everyone kind of wants to own property and have rentals and such. And so I thought that was the only way to get involved in real estate. And so that was my first step as I ended up purchasing a duplex. I soon found out that really wasn't for me with the tenants, repairs, and just it was very hard to manage while having a full-time W-2 as well in regards to certain things coming up. And then the cash flow ended up like really not even being that great at the end of the day anyways. So I started thinking more about, what other opportunities can you go into with real estate? And I found lending, which aligns more with my W-2, which provides good capital. And then, being able to connect with other individuals that have these deals. So paying attention to the detail, building your network of individuals that you trust. So ultimately, I decided once again that being a landlord was not for me, and that I'd rather lend my money on first position deals because that feels secure to me. Working with the same people kind of over and over that you vetted, so there's also a sense of security as well, and it affords flexibility as well when you have a full-time W-2, so that you can kind of do it on the side. Whereas if you're a landlord, you don't necessarily have the flexibility of I'll reply when I want to, or I'll work on this deal when I want to. It's more like if your tenants need you, then you need to reply like then, right? It needs to be addressed in that time. So once again, I think that it kind of just worked into the W-2 that I have and my time constraints of the time, but also with the flexibility to work on it when I want to.
Yeah, that flexibility is so important, right? And I think that's a huge advantage that lending has over, owning properties, kind of like you mentioned. And it's so funny that you're talking about, how the owning properties like wasn't what you imagined, because I certainly thought that it would be a lot more passive than it
Right,
actually is.
right.
And it certainly is not that
Well,
way.
a lot of people don't realize you have one heavy expense, right? Like your swamp cooler doesn't work. Shout out to the realtor that sold me the duplex. But you have one major expense and it wipes out everything, right? And so I think a lot of people when they're getting into real estate, they might look at the potential cash flow, but if one thing comes up, it's really hard to anticipate if you're new what that looks like and how that can really hit into your cash.
Right. And it's one thing when you have a job or W 2 income to kind of fall back on. But if that was your kind of like retirement plan, right, is to get like a couple properties and cash flow from them and think that that's going to sustain you. And then you have these big expenses.
Right.
Where's that money going to come from,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about, why real estate over maybe something else, right? There's stocks, there's other like side hustles. You could be selling me essential oils. Like what's the reason behind like real estate over other things for you?
Yeah. So with real estate, I heard it before and I was like, well, that can't be true. But the more I looked into it, if you hold real estate long enough, you will win, right? So time over time, I mean, if you're looking year to year, it might increase, it might decrease. But if you hold and hold and hold, at some point you're going to come ahead. And so it will continue to increase over time once again. And it's something that everyone is going to always need. Everyone always needs housing, whether it's rentals or purchasing homes. And it's something that you can take tax benefits from as well. So I think that that's a multifaceted strategy. And there's such large networks of people that are very skilled in this, which allows you to build really great relationships with people that have a lot of experience in that particular area. And I think it was just something that I was drawn to because, everyone or most people desire to be homeowners, right? And so when you go through the process yourself, you're like, oh, well, this is interesting. I know how to do this. Maybe I can learn more about this whole process. Do I want to be a landlord? Do I want to lend on this? And it all kind of just like comes full circle where you're learning about every part of the home ownership part, and then how can you fund it, how do you do fix and flips, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, I think it was just something that I was naturally drawn to after purchasing my first home, and just becoming interested in the whole process, understanding that people are always going to have a need for housing and a need for money in order to build housing or do repairs on existing houses.
No, that's awesome. And then kind of going back to your, decision to move into lending, you said something about first position. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that is and what that means or why you're leaning in that direction for your lending?
Yeah. So first position essentially means that you would be the first person to be paid back, whereas there can be a first position, a second position, third position, and the order in which it's filed with the title company is the order that that lender gets paid. So if you're first position, whenever the person who borrowed the money is paying the money back, the first position gets paid first. So if there's not enough money back after first position, then second and third don't get paid. So you can always foreclose in first position, meaning you could take over the house that you are loaning the money against. So it gives you property, so it secures you in that aspect. And it's, I would say, safer, of course, than second position, third position, higher positions, because you always have that house to foreclose on if needed. Of course, that's not why you're lending. You're not lending to own or foreclose on the house. But they always say you want to lend to own. So there always is that risk factor that you would need to foreclose if something does go wrong, which, goes into your whole what is your risk tolerance and such. But at the end of the day, first position I would say is still the safest. And how mine works and my risk tolerance, that is what I have found to be most aligned like with my personality.
So just to clarify, like a first position loan is kind of like the mortgage you have on a house, like that first position that you got with the bank. Is it kind of the similar concept?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, just thinking about the value of houses here in Utah where we live, like that's kind of a lot of money. So, do you have to have like millions and millions of dollars to be a lender, or can you tell me a little bit more?
So for first position, some of them are a little bit lower. It kind of depends on where you're investing as well, right? So for Utah, like you said, the market is a little bit higher. It's pretty expensive here, as you and I both know. So it may be a little bit harder to finance lower entry deals. But many people are building and doing fix and flips. Let's say, like I'm from Oklahoma, so the cost of living is lower there, where houses might be cheaper to purchase. So let's say you may only need I say only, you may need $100,000 to have a first position loan. But when you think about it, $100,000 to fund a fix and flip, I would say in the big spectrum of how much houses could cost is relatively low. But you could also partner with other individuals. So let's say you have 50,000, 20,000. You can JV or joint venture, which is when you link up with other individuals that have money. So if there's a total of 100,000, let's say you can have five people with $20,000 who are all JVing together. Of course, that's going to be up to the borrower if they want JVs on the deal and such. But I would say there's almost always opportunities. Regardless of the amount that you have, it just might be structured in a different way because each deal is completely different. But if you have money, there's always an opportunity to link up with other individuals or lend for different scenarios.
That's awesome. And I love that, you can kind of get started at a variety of different starting points. Like you gave $20,000 as an example. And, when you're thinking first position loans and a mortgage on a house, you might think that that needs to be 500,000, right? Those are drastically different numbers and a lot more accessible to people. So tell me about kind of the biggest lesson that you've learned so far on this journey, from like a lending or real estate perspective.
I think the biggest lesson I've learned, and I I hate to admit it, but it's the networking aspect, right? So even for introverts, so I would consider myself an extroverted introvert, it's really important to find those people that are doing what you want to do and connecting with them and finding that inner network of individuals that are doing, like I said before, what you want to do. So I would advise to not take advice from people who aren't doing or haven't done what you want, right? So if someone's like, "Hey, that's a stupid idea. Don't lend on that." Well, have you lent money before? Are you even in the real estate world, right? And so don't let people give you a negative feeling just because they're inexperienced, don't know what they're talking about, or it's like hearsay, right? And on the flip side of that, you want to make sure that you are working with experienced individuals that have a good track record and that you vetted them, meaning you need to make sure that you talk to resources and references so that we know that what they're saying that they're doing is actually accurate, right? Because unfortunately, there are some bad players in the lending game and real estate in general. With any business, there's going to be bad individuals, right? And so you want to make sure that you're working with ethical individuals that are responsible, trustworthy, and keep their word at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's a huge point. And just because someone is charismatic or seems to know everybody doesn't necessarily mean that they have your best interests at heart. And
Right.
so getting references from people who have lent money to them before or have done projects with them before might be a great idea when you're looking at kind of getting started as well. I think that's a really, really good point. Um, Talk to me a little bit about if you have any like habits or routines, because it sounds like you're balancing multiple things right now, right? You have your W 2 job, and then you're also working in this real estate world from the lending perspective. So, do you have any habits or routines that are helping you kind of stay on track with doing both of those things at the same time?
Yeah, so I try to time block, right? So during your W-2 hours, you work, obviously, because lots of people don't have any flexibility at all during that time period. But let's say I have a lunch hour open or the time before my work or the time after my work. I try to make sure each week I do something that aligns with what my end goals are. So whether that's networking, so having Zoom calls with new individuals that I want to meet, whether that's meeting people in person for lunch meetings, during my lunchtime or on weekends so that I can network with them in person, whether it's reading another finance book. So whether it's also good to gain this knowledge, but you have to put it into action, right? And I think that's the problem is that we get stuck in this analysis. I'll be the first person to admit I'm probably the queen of this, right? But I had to step back and realize that I needed to do action, even if it's imperfect action, but it needs to be like well thought out, right? So you can't just always sit on the sidelines. You need to be actively trying to move forward, even if it's just like 1% each day. Making an effort to move forward is necessary. So I would say, as long as you're like time blocking, like I'm doing, I think that it's helpful, right? Because it's so easy for many weeks to go by, and then you're like, well, I was just really busy. But at what point are you actually going to make an effort to take action, right? And so I think it's just having also like a checklist and being like, okay, I need to put a deadline. Like worst case scenario, this needs to be completed by this date. And if it's not, like something else has got to go so that you can make that a priority.
Yeah. Now, thinking about, because I know you, tell me a little bit more about the funds that you're using for lending. Is this just you have a big checkbook that you're utilizing, or are you doing anything else? I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so right now, I have a previous employer. So I'm employed at my W-2, but I have previous companies that I've worked for that allowed me to have a 401k at my previous employers. So after extensive reading, for example, this was something that I read about, but then took it and made it go into action, is I rolled over my previous employer's 401k account into a self-directed 401k. And what that essentially means is that I'm allowed to invest that into real estate as long as it's not something that I personally own. Like I can't invest it into my own rental property or a vacation home for myself. And so by rolling that over, it allows me more direction and to basically vet lending deals and be able to use that rolled over money into lending for different real estate deals. So that's one chunk of money. And then anyone, of course, can use anything out of their checking or savings account. I think that's a great opportunity as well. But of course, with your previous employer's accounts, a lot of times that money is just sitting there and it's making not great returns. So if you know that you can get a better return, that you've vetted, this real estate deal through lending, I think that certainly makes more sense.
Yeah. And I also think it maybe allows you to have even more funds available for lending too, right? Because
Yes.
those previous employers, like if you worked there for several years, right, and you're allowed to put, almost 20K in per year, and let's say that that didn't go up or down, but you worked there for 5 years or there was some sort of match, it's very feasible that you might have 100,000 in an old 401k and you might not have 100,000 in your checking account,
Yep.
right? And so I think
Correct.
it's much more likely that you'll have a larger chunk of change in an old 401k, which I think is really cool opportunity, to take that to the next level and invest
Yeah.
it in a self-directed fashion.
Absolutely. Because honestly, mine was
Yeah.
just sitting there, and you kind of just forget about it, which is bad. You should not forget about it. But I was like, oh, yeah, what happened to those funds? So it's a perfect opportunity because you're right. It does add quickly for a lot of, healthcare professionals in particular, especially when companies will vest, they'll match a certain percentage of your 401k. So that grows a little bit faster than like your regular checking or savings account, to your point. So yeah, it's a great source to use for funding deals.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I'm glad we were kind of talking about that because I bet that applies to so many people that are listening here too. So hopefully they'll take a look at that going forward and maybe convert to self-directed for themselves also.
Correct.
So tell me if you could give just one piece of advice in about 30 seconds for someone just starting out in their financial independence journey, what would that be?
Yeah, it would be to figure out what your goals are, right? Because everyone wants to own property and be a landlord. However, when you think about it at the end of the day, like, hey, I want to retire at 50. Well, how many rentals are you going to have and for you to manage in order to retire by the age of 50? I bet it's a lot more than a lot of people think, right? And so I think really putting numbers to paper and saying, hey, this is my goal at the end of the day. I'm retired by this age. I need to make this much passive income each month, and in order to do that, these are the steps that I need to take. So, do I need like 15 different rental properties? Do I need short term rentals? Can I lend my money and make a good return on that instead and have it be completely passive versus actively having to manage tenants and houses, et cetera, et cetera? So, getting very clear on what your goals are and what the steps are in order to achieve that.
Man, that's such good advice because I think you kind of hear what other people are doing and it sounds like, man, this might be a good fit for you. I'll give you an example. Like, I first thought, wow, short term rentals, man, they sound really cool. They make a ton of sense. Maybe I want to do this too. Right. And so you go down this path and you realize that, wow, it's not only a rental, but it's also the hospitality business. Right.
Yep.
And you have to respond to people who can't follow the instructions on how to
Right.
access your property, or
Right.
they don't see the extra roll of toilet paper under the bathroom sink, or all these different things that I just really wasn't thinking about. And it's really not conducive to my W 2, right? But
Right.
other
Right.
people are saying, oh, I make so much money from this short term rental. And I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. I'll do that too. But really, it didn't line up with my goals. And so that's such a good point to kind of start with the end in mind, basically, when you're going forward, deciding how to invest your money and your time.
Yeah. And you need to know who you are as an individual too, right? To your point. Like, do I want to manage tenants and repair? No, I don't. I do not at all. Do I align with paying attention to detail and analyzing real estate deals and deploying capital and making money passively? Yes, that aligns with my personality. So it's important to know like who you are, right? Because you could have this strategy, but you're going to hate it if it doesn't align with like your personality and what you want to do at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so, kind of speaking about passive income a little bit more, I'd love to hear about like any travel or outdoor or fun experiences that you have planned kind of in the near future, thinking about just earning passive income and maybe one of your goals for things to check off.
Yeah. So unlike you, I've done a very poor job recently, planning vacations and being more active. So what I would really like to do is go to Ireland, but I have a whole list of things. I'm also very intrigued by Bhutan. I don't even know if they're allowing tourists, but it looks absolutely beautiful, and I would love to be able to go there. Honestly, anywhere outside of Utah, and maybe somewhere cold, Alaska, anywhere. I'll take anywhere outside of Utah, honestly. I am there. So my goal for this year is to be more intentional about spending time getting away from work. Us healthcare professionals are very, I would say, guilty of doing this, right? And a lot of it, I think, is just a result of the type of jobs that we have, that we don't take the time to kind of step back and, uh, you know, really relax and de-stress and just detach from the job. So I'm excited to go anywhere, Andrea, and I'm sure that I can take some suggestions from your multiple list of all the different places that you've gone.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited for you. And now that we're getting into summer, you definitely need to get out somewhere. So, yeah, I know you're probably burning up these days. So,
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
um, so thinking about just, anyone who's listening, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me would be messaging either the podcast Instagram or to message me on my personal Instagram, which is liz.in.slc. I know it's a very original name, but of course, we are both in Utah, so I think that you'll be able to find me there. So, yeah, messaging on IG.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Liz, for your time. We really appreciate it and loved hearing about your journey and looking forward to having future guests here on From Corporate to Cashflow. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Andrea.